So I am not always a fan of when plans change, but I am a fan of what God can do when those plans change. I was recently visiting a friend in Maryland, and for various reasons, we ended up at a church that wasn't her church. It was like a friend of a friend's church, and at a service time that we weren't even supposed to be there at. But what that preacher, and by the way, the preacher who was preaching that day, he was not even their regular preacher. But I'm telling you, what he had to say, it grabbed me so much and it resonated, and I was spiritually jazzed, not just for that day, but much farther into it, at the point that when I listened to the podcast later, the part that really spoke to me wasn't even on the podcast. Like, I thought at first they just cut part of his teaching. What's up with that? And then I realized that the first service was recorded, which was much more... it was just a little more regimented, probably kind of following his notes. But that third service, the one that we were at, he totally went off script. And I completely believe he was moving with the Spirit because, again, there was fruit that was born. So I'm going to share a little snippet. He was talking about the story of Caleb and Joshua and how they were sent out as spies into the promised land to discover what that land was. And he talked about not settling and occupying territory. And he made this comment about, why would we rent what God has given us to own? And he told a story from when he and his wife, when they were renters, they weren't responsible for a lot of things, right? The landlord handles a lot of details that you don't. But then they bought their first house and they're in this new neighborhood. And now he's got responsibility for that house, right? Well, at first, one of his neighbors, he noticed she was their lawn wasn't fenced in. So she was kind of mowing part of his lawn. Okay, hey, he's like, you know what? It was one less thing I had to deal with. Like, I was happy to let her do what technically I was supposed to be doing. But then a few years goes by and he notices she just the area that she's mowing kind of starts creeping in more and more into his property. And now he's going to put a fence around his line. So now he has to step in and say, actually, and I don't think it was an altercation, but it definitely sounded like he had to kind of put his foot down and say, excuse me, this is my property. And he's like, I needed to take responsibility for what God had given me to do. And he talked about in our own life, where has God given us responsibility? What has he given us to own? Where do we have the authority and need to take authority for what God has given us to do? So that's my question to you. Where has God given you authority in your life that you are allowing someone else, whether on purpose or just by laziness, to take that away?